the 2017 Debate for the State.
Good evening and welcome to the 2017 Debate for the State, live from IBEW Union Hall here in Highland Springs, Virginia. I'm Bill Fitzgerald from CBS 6 in Richmond.
And I'm Barbara Ciara from News 3 in Norfolk. Tonight's debate features both of the Democratic candidates for governor. But before we introduce them, Bill, let's take a look at the rules that they both agreed to.
Now, each candidate will get to make a 2-minute opening and closing statement, the order determined already by a coin flip. The candidate who is asked the first question will get 90 seconds to respond, with his competitor then being given 60 seconds to reply.
And then after that, we move on to the next question. Unless the second candidate mentions the first candidate by name, it will then be at the discretion of us, your moderators, if the first candidate should get an additional 30-second rebuttal.
Now, we'd like to ask the audience at this point to refrain from applause, except at the end of the debate, and of course, during the candidate introductions, that is permitted as well. Please, if you have signs, I didn't see any on the way in, keep them down. Try not to obstruct the television cameras. Make sure your cell phones are off or on mute. So right now, let's welcome to the stage Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam and former Congressman Tom Perriello.
Gentlemen, welcome. As determined by the aforementioned coin flip, Mr. Tom Perriello will have the first, or will be the first, to deliver the opening statement.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the IBEW for having us here tonight, and thank you to our moderators. This is an amazing moment here in Virginia. Virginia is the Commonwealth that gave my family the chance to live the American dream. My father was the son of immigrants, and he got a scholarship to be able to go to the University of Virginia. He worked hard, but back then you came out of college debt-free, and he was able to raise, along with my mother, me and my siblings in Charlottesville and Albemarle County with great public schools and a wonderful community. Unfortunately today, that dream has gotten harder and harder for so many families. The average amount of student debt coming out of college is $35,000. We have a minimum wage today that is below that of West Virginia's. It's a poverty wage of only $14,000 a year. The median income in Virginia hasn't moved in 18 years. It has gotten harder and harder with more people working 2 or 3 jobs to get by. We have so many great things going on in the Virginia. We've had a great governor in Terry McAuliffe to help push for that, but we've had a Republican legislature that has stood in the way of middle-class growth year in and year out. It is time for us not just to win this governor's race, but to win back the House of Delegates so that we can have a pro-growth strategy that gives the middle class a chance. We've seen fewer and fewer small businesses able to make it in our small and medium-sized town communities. And for all of our progress, we continue to have a criminal code that is one of the most regressive in the country. We have too many young people ending up on a school-to-prison pipeline instead of a school-to-workforce development pipeline. When instead we invest in people's education and in their potential, not only does it help those individuals, but it actually expands our tax base and creates a greater opportunity for us to grow the working and middle class. That's the opportunity that I believe people want, regardless of whether they're on the right or the left, whether they're in the north or the south of the state. And I believe as governor, we can fight to rejuvenate that dream here in Virginia and give everyone a shot and leave no race or region behind in Virginia. Thank you.
Well, good evening, and thanks to the sponsors and the moderators tonight, and also like to welcome my wife Pam and my daughter Aubrey here tonight. Thank you for being here. My name is Ralph Northam, and I have traveled around the Commonwealth listening to a lot of folks and talking to folks about my record in my 9 years of public service to the Commonwealth of Virginia, and a lot of people ask, what distinguishes you from your opponent? First of all, I have always fought for progressive democratic values. I've run in some difficult races. In 2007, I ran against an 8-year incumbent and was successful. In 2013, I actually got the most votes of any statewide candidate in Virginia history in an off-year election. I have never been afraid of standing up to big corporations and PACs, starting with the NRA. I have a D rating. I have always fought for common sense gun ownership. I fought against a tobacco company and passed the smoking ban in restaurants. And I've stood up to big oil and big gas, being the first elected official in Virginia statewide to fight against offshore drilling. Terry McCullough and I have helped together to build the new Virginia economy. We've brought in over 190,000 new jobs to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Our unemployment rate has gone from 5.4 to 3.8%. I have led the fight for women against the attacks on women's reproductive health care. I stood by Mark Herring to make sure that we had marriage equality in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I stood up to big tobacco and made sure that we had a smoking ban in restaurants. I am pleased to have grassroots support across the Commonwealth. I have over 45,000 contributions, 90% of them less than $100. Also, 85% of them are from Virginians. I'm pleased to have Terry McCullough's support, Mark Warner, Tim Kaine, our Virginia congressmen, Virginia state senators and delegates. I look forward to sharing my vision for Virginia with you tonight. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for listening.
Mr. Perriello, the first question to you. Let's start with jobs tonight. Virginia's jobless rate recently dropped to its lowest level in nearly a decade, though critics say not enough of those jobs are the type that can support a family and provide economic security. As governor, what will you do to attract more high-quality jobs to the Commonwealth and help existing businesses expand?
Well, it's a very, very important question. Jobs are at the center of our campaign, but they have to be the kind of jobs that you can support a family with. We believe we need to move from an old system that focuses just on a four-year college university to having multiple tracks out of high school, including the apprenticeship programs, trade schools, and community college. We're the first campaign in Virginia history to support 2 years of debt-free trade school apprenticeship programs and community college. This isn't just important for the individuals who then have a pathway into the working and middle class. It's also important for the employers that we want to attract and those we want to grow here. It's actually far cheaper for us to help businesses here already in Virginia to expand their employment than it is to bring those from the outside, though we need to do both. We have put together a comprehensive tax reform plan that pays entirely for a universal pre-K and 2 years of debt-free workforce development, as well as 8 weeks of paid medical leave, because too many people end up losing jobs once they have them because a kid or an aging parent is ill and they're not able to be home with those who are sick. We need to have a workforce here that makes the middle class a reality for more families. We believe a huge portion of that are the clean energy jobs of the future, which is why we've stood against these wasteful pipelines and for investments in the wind, solar, and energy efficiency jobs that could employ tens of thousands across Virginia.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, our unemployment rate is at 3.8% in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But our economy is not working for everybody. I grew up on the Eastern Shore, and I can promise you the unemployment rate there or in the south side of Virginia or in the southwest is nowhere close to 3.8%. So how do we lift up all of Virginia? First of all, we need to know that the jobs of the 21st century are in STEAM-related areas: science, technology, engineering, arts, and the math. And then the next thing we need to do is be able to train our future workforce to make sure that everybody has access to a world-class education. I have a program that I rolled out a few weeks ago. It's called G3. It stands for Get Skilled, Get a Job, and Give Back. That means that you have free community college with the understanding that once you become certified, you give back a year of public service. That can be in a high-need area, a high-job area in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It can be through public service. That's the way I did. The United States Army paid for my education, and I gave back 8 years to our country.
Okay. This question is directed to you.
Yes, thank you.
It's concerning the minimum wage. It's on the mind of one of your constituents by the name of Jewel from Richmond. She would like to know what you think it should be. It is currently $7.25 in Virginia, Mr. Northam, which is the federal standard. Given the divide in the House of Delegates and the state Senate, is raising the minimum wage here in the Commonwealth even a possibility, asks Jewel.
Thank you, Jewel. And you know, I grew up on the Eastern Shore, and I've had a lot of different jobs, starting working on a farm, which I grew up on, and then working for a construction crew. I was actually the captain of a fishing boat for a little while and a mate. And the point that I would make to you is that I worked for less than minimum wage. I learned firsthand there is no way that anybody in this state should or can either support themselves or their families on $7.25 an hour. I was actually the tie-breaking vote A bill was on the floor of the Senate to raise the minimum wage. I support raising our minimum wage. Both Tom and I are on the record for starting the minimum wage at $15 an hour. So that is very important to us. Now, how do we get that done in Richmond? We get it done with experience and relationships with fellow legislators, and that's my reputation in Richmond. I am able to bring people from both sides of the aisle, sit them down, use reason and logic, and you know, we agree to disagree in Richmond, and that's okay, but at the end of the day, we do what's in the best interest of Virginia. That's what I did when I passed the smoking ban in restaurants across the Commonwealth of Virginia. If you can imagine the amount of influence that the tobacco industries have in Virginia, but I was able to bring people from both sides of the aisle and get that done. So I plan to do the same thing for our workers, for our labor across the Commonwealth of Virginia, and make sure that they don't have to continue to try to support their families on $7.25 an hour.
Mr. Perriello, your response.
When I think about the minimum wage, I don't think about $7.25 an hour. I think about $14,000 a year. That's what that is. And the most typical minimum wage worker in Virginia is not a 22-year-old college graduate trying to find themselves. It's a 36-year-old mother of two. And the most typical thing for her to do when she is done with her minimum wage job is to get on a bus to go to her second minimum wage job. I meet with women every week who work over 80 hours a week and make less than $30,000 a year, trying desperately to keep the lights on for the kids to do the homework that they can't make at home to help them with. These aren't bad parents, these are heroic parents who are being paid poverty wages, and we wonder why we see underperformance in our schools. The irony here is when we raise the minimum wage, it's actually a growth strategy. And the first industries to grow are those that are most concerned, hospitality and restaurants. We've been told for 30 years that this is somehow an anti-growth strategy. The problem with this is evidence. The data shows that when we raise the minimum wage and there's more disposable income, we can move forward with growth from the bottom up.
Thank you.
Mr. Perriello, we're broadcasting live, as you know, from the local IBEW Union Hall here in Highland Springs. So let's talk unions for a second. Virginia from McLean says she is concerned about the state laws which she believes weaken the power of employees who choose to collectively bargain. This is a right-to-work state. In the past, even Governor Terry McAuliffe has said he would not try to change that law. Would you?
I would. I think it undermines the middle class and the working class here in Virginia, and I think that's an anti-growth strategy. I think we've been told for many decades now that somehow these strategies from the right help create growth. They don't. They actually create consolidation. And the consolidation of wealth has had a suffocating effect on middle-class growth and increase of wages and salaries in the middle class, which is where the growth comes from. We believe we need to move in other directions. It will be difficult here in Richmond. I don't deny that. But when we look at some of the contracts we've already had around the state, when you include a PLA, you tend to get a better product, things come back on time, and you have the professionalism that's there. When you remove it, the taxpayers always end up picking up the bill later because we get shoddier work and the tax bill comes back later. So it's important for workers to have negotiating power here in our community. My great-grandfather was actually a union president back in the day a long time ago. I was down in coal country recently, and one of the workers said to me, you know, if they could be paying us $2 an hour today, they still would be. And ultimately what we need to understand is that things like the establishment of the 40-hour work week and the weekend came from a reason, and that was because people were able to organize. Now ultimately this has to be a partnership. It has to be a partnership between ensuring people make a living wage and giving small businesses the kind of support they need to be able to grow in the economies and the sectors of the future. I believe that's a partnership we can do here in Virginia that will be absolutely pro-business and pro-worker.
Dr. Norton.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate Labor tonight for helping to defeat the constitutional amendment this past year. That was an effort where everybody went out and knocked on doors and made phone calls against some very cumbersome language, by the way. So you all deserve a tremendous deal of credit for doing that. As far as a constitutional amendment, we don't need that, and I stood up and I traveled around the Commonwealth of Virginia and helped to fight that as well. I think also we have to be realistic in Virginia, what we can get done with our current legislature. So I think rather than pick fights that we perhaps can't win right now, we need to talk about how can we help labor? How can we help with PLAs, which are project labor agreements? Those are very important to labor and unions right now. We also have to talk about the minimum wage, raising it from $7.25 to $15 an hour. And we also need to talk about things like paid sick leave. These are things that help labor, that help workers across the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we all need to work together and make sure that we protect labor, to make sure that they have access to their benefits and pensions and health care, and that's what I'll continue to do as the next governor.
Dr. Northam.
Yes.
On the subject of criminal justice, a couple of Virginians, including Dawa from Fairfax, told us that they're concerned about the so-called school-to-prison pipeline, which disproportionately affects minority and disabled students. The Center for Public Integrity says that Virginia is the worst in the nation when it comes to referring students who get into trouble at school to police and courts. How do you bring that percentage down is the question, and how do you best discipline students who are routinely causing classroom disruptions and or creating an unsafe learning environment?
Well, thank you for the question. And first of all, racial profiling needs to stop not only in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but in this country. And I hate to continue to hear the different stories for that. As far as criminal justice reform, I've actually unrolled a package several weeks ago, and there's no question that we need to interrupt that pipeline from school to prison. I take care of children, adolescents, and I see a lot of them that just have made decisions. They haven't had opportunities that other folks have had. So we need to stop putting those individuals in detention centers, into jails, and rather try to keep these people in our communities with counselors and mentors. Now, one of the things that I feel very strongly about, and this actually comes from my 92-year-old father who's a judge, he said, "Ralph, why are you all continuing to spend $67 million a year to enforce marijuana laws in the Commonwealth of Virginia? And by the way, African Americans are 2.8 times more likely to be picked up on the street for doing the same thing that white people do and be put in jail." That has to stop. So criminal justice reform is very, very important. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we keep people from getting into that pipeline. One of the things that I have worked so hard on in the Commonwealth of Virginia is making sure we promote pre-K education. That's the best time to get to our children. That's when they're impressionable. We need to make sure that all children have the same opportunity in the Commonwealth of Virginia. If one family has the means to go to pre-K and another one doesn't, that's what starts the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and they never catch up.
Mr. Perriello.
So let's start in the classroom. One of the ways since the Great Recession began that the General Assembly, led by Republicans, have balanced the budget is through gimmicks that change the ratio between support staff and teachers. That means when those kids do act up in any sort of way, instead of getting counseling for that cry to help, they are sent to a principal's office because we are underfunding the support in our schools to give them a chance for that cry for help to be answered. Then we have one of the most regressive criminal codes in the country. An enormous amount of our public defense docket is taken up with nonviolent marijuana possessions and with the stealing of cell phones, because we have one of the lowest levels of what constitutes felony larceny in the entire country. Once people are charged, we provide too little legal defense. Then we have bail laws, which mean thousands of Virginians are actually serving time without ever having been convicted in the first place. Then many of them are handed a chance to plea out for time served, which people too, because they're desperately eager to get home to their own families. Then you signed and introduced yourself into the criminal justice reform. That's only the beginning of the story of the reforms that we need to look into.
Mr. Perriello, a lot has been done over the last few years when it comes to restoring the right to vote for felons in Virginia. Governor Terry McAuliffe has made it a top priority. Restoring one's right to vote doesn't help him or her get a job, and those who have been released from prison but can't find steady work are liable to commit another crime. What is your plan for reducing recidivism so that those who have served their time can actually gain gainful employment?
So first, Governor McAuliffe deserves tremendous credit for restoring the rights of those who've served their time and working on reducing juvenile justice, where we've previously had the highest level of juvenile incarceration in the country. Those are pieces of progress we need to build on. I was at a welding shop here in Richmond not long ago that has set up an apprenticeship program for those who've served their time. They were happy to do it. Those who got out were excited to have the second chance. The question was whether there was enough demand for the work coming out of the apprenticeship program. If we gave just a small plus up in contracting from the state and from cities for those who were locally owned companies to be making and growing things here in Virginia again, we could see an enormous explosion of small business jobs and trade jobs across Virginia. And instead of spending $30,000 per year to incarcerate someone, meaning $300,000 over a decade, if we just helped with $10,000 up front to get through trade school and move into that small business's ability to expand a job, we would actually see a return to taxpayers of about $400,000 per decade for that $10,000 investment. When we invest in Virginians, we do not lose, but we have to be willing to start building and growing some things here in Virginia again. And
Virginians, and I've had so many. Thank you for letting me get back into society. Thank you for letting me have my self-esteem back. It is so important. You asked about recidivism. One of our largest challenges in our jails and penitentiaries right now is mental health. And we have too many individuals that need access to mental health care in our jails and penitentiaries. I have chaired the task group for mental health, and we have made a lot of progress. And one of the questions that's asked is, how do we pay for this? I'll tell you how we pay for it tonight. It's called Medicaid expansion. And we have fought for that. I have led that fight. But if we can bring our tax money back to the Commonwealth of Virginia, then we'll be able to take care of a lot of these individuals that need care to a person like myself, a provider, need access to their medications, and it will keep them out of our jails and in our society where they should be with their families.
Dr. Northam, the heroin and opioid epidemic has been declared a public health crisis here in the state of Virginia. It's colorblind, and it's killing people in red and blue parts of the state. Local sheriffs, including Henrico's Mike Wade, say that their jails are full of addicts, many of whom will spend most of their lives going in and out of lockup because they can't break the cycle of addiction. That's why. How do you attack this crisis both inside and outside of our jails?
Thank you, Barbara. And I am so glad that you brought that up tonight. As a doctor and as Lieutenant Governor, I have been traveling around the Commonwealth working with Governor McAuliffe and Attorney General Mark Herring. You are exactly right. This is a crisis in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it does not discriminate. Last year, we lost 806 Virginians to opioid overdose. This year, we've lost over 1,000. That's something that we can't continue. That's more individuals than will be killed in motor vehicle accidents. So how do we attack the issue? Number one, we talk to providers like myself, especially those in training, and rethink how we take care of acute and chronic pain. What's happening, Barbara, is people will get a prescription oftentimes. They'll come back for a refill. It can't be refilled, and they turn to the street where they have heroin. Heroin is now being laced with fentanyl and carfentanil, and if they get hold of that and don't have naloxone, which we've actually given a blanket prescription for in the Commonwealth of Virginia, then they're going to be a statistic. And finally, we need to work with law enforcement. The proper place for these individuals, and by the way, you hear people say, well, these are bad people. They're not bad people. They're our friends, our neighbors, perhaps people in our family. We need to make sure that they have access to the care that they need. We just put in about $30 million to our budget this year for mental health care to work with our community service boards to make sure that there is same-day treatment for those that are at risk for opioid addiction and overdose. So my message to all of you tonight would be that we're there to help. If you have friends or family that need help, please let them know that we're here to help them. Thank you for the question.
3 Virginians die every day from the opioid crisis. I was talking to a mother recently who has a 6th grade son, and she said that he has lost 14 of his classmates have lost parents to the opioid epidemic this year. That's the conversation they're having to have in school week in and week out. One of the things we've heard when we visit clinics is this need to destigmatize seeking treatment itself. Part of this is a transformation in our thinking to understand addiction not as a criminal problem, but as a public health problem. And I think this is something that is bringing together communities across red and blue lines to think more generally about the issues of how we treat addiction, how we treat mental health issues, and looking at criminal justice reform more broadly. It's crucial that we get people the care that they need. We've talked about a debt forgiveness program for those moving into jobs related to addiction services, particularly being able to locate in high-need areas with this urgency. And we need to look at the root causes, including the economic development gaps in these areas and Big Pharma's role in creating this crisis in the first place.
Mr. Perriello, this question is for you. Moving to education. We received a question from Tina in Fairfax about charter schools. The Virginia House and Senate passed legislation this year to expand charter schools in districts with struggling schools. Now, as we've seen right here in Richmond, while many elected school board members and school district administrators don't like charter schools, many parents love them and will actually take part in a lottery to get their child into them. Do you oppose or support the expansion of charter schools?
I do not support the expansion of that because of the evidence. I think one of the things I learned in a great public education system was to look at the data, and we haven't seen the improved performance in those areas. What we have seen is that when we actually invest in our public schools and give our teachers the flexibility they need to actually do student-centered design, there is not a school district in the Commonwealth that cannot overperform. We need to make sure that we're getting people, the support staff, into the classrooms that we need, and we need to be reforming SOLs and SOQs to make sure that we can get the critical thinking skills and the project-based learning skills that are part of the future. We believe we have to move from a K through 12 education system to a P through 14 education system. We picked a K through 12 system before because that was the amount of training that was needed to launch someone into a career they could support their families with. In today's economy, not just of globalization, but of automation and consolidation, that's simply not enough. We need a universal pre-K year, and we need at least 2 years of career and skills training or moving into higher education. People say we can't afford it. We have put out a tax reform proposal that pays for every penny of that, along with 8 weeks of paid medical leave, and we're the only candidate in this race that has done that. We must invest in education, and when we talk about underperforming schools, instead of pointing the finger at our teachers and principals, we should see that the greatest correlation of underperformance is concentration of poverty. And why is it we haven't done more to address that issue of poverty? And one of the best ways to do that is to stop paying poverty wages by raising the minimum wage and giving people a living wage they can support their families with.
Thank you. You know, I grew up on a small farm on the Eastern Shore. I am standing on this stage tonight because I had access to a world-class education system. My wife is a K through 5 science teacher. We know all too well the importance of education in Virginia, but you know what? Our teachers right now in Virginia are making $7,500 less than the national average. If we're going to recruit and retain talented, good teachers, we have to step up to the plate and put our money where our mouth is and say, we're going to make K through 12 education a priority. So the other thing that we need to do, and something that I have been working very hard on, is pre-K education. And as I said earlier, it's the difference between the haves and the have-nots. So when you talk about things like charter schools, which on a regional basis may be an option, but we're not there yet. And I'll tell you why, because of the teachers that are still getting paid $7,500 less. Things like vouchers, things that we hear our friends on the other side of the aisle talking about, are not good for K through 12 education now. We need to make sure that we fund K through 12 first before we move on to other things like charter schools.
Dr. Norton, still on the subject of education, one Richmond voter points out that since 2007, the average cost of tuition and mandatory fees at public four-year college has gone up 71% here in Virginia. What is your plan to make college more affordable, and does the governor have the ability to convince the General Assembly to increase state funding?
Well, the governor has the ability to encourage the General Assembly. The governor also is able to appoint people to boards and commissions, or college boards, so there's some influence there as well. But one of my pet peeves, and Pam and I raised 2 children, one of them is with us tonight, is that when we work and pay taxes and raise our children in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we feel like they should have first dibs, if you will, at our colleges and universities. It's become very competitive because we in Richmond have underfunded higher education. So what do they do in response? They take students from other other states. And diversity is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but we need to fund our colleges and universities so that they don't have to do that, and we're not doing it. And just as you said, the funding from the state for schools like William and Mary, UVA, has actually gone down below 10%. We cannot continue on that trajectory, and what's happening, it's causing the tuition to rise. And again, it's a trajectory that we can't continue. And the other point that I would make to you all tonight, it is not necessary for everybody to go to a four-year college to get a good paying job. And they're not white collar, they're not blue collar, but they're new collar jobs. These are high-tech jobs out there that people can get through a certification or apprenticeship program. And so what we've done is we've introduced the plan, get skilled, get a job, and give back, to let people do just that, to let them have 2 years of free community college with the understanding that they'll give back a year to public service.
You know, I've had the blessing to work around the world, many times getting to represent the United States, and the countries we're competing against, higher education is free. Now, here we're not going to start with that, but we are going to start with 2 years of debt-free community college, trade school, or apprenticeship program, which we fully pay for. Many people are using the 2+2 system to matriculate in as third years, thus cutting their student debt in half. We are also proposing a student refinance system that would help those carrying student debt reduce their monthly payments by $50 to $100 a month. I believe higher education should be free, but I know we're not going to get that through the General Assembly right away. But we have to make it more affordable. This is an investment and a growth strategy. And as Dr. Northam mentioned, we cannot just demagogue our universities for letting in more students when we haven't made the investments from Richmond to make them competitive in those ways. So we have to reduce student debt for those who've gone. We need to provide multiple pathways out there to bring down remain.
No. In this case, it was a compliment.
I understand.
So, Mr. Perez, following up on that aside, the plan that you just outlined, and you mentioned the difficulty getting something through the Republican-controlled General Assembly, does that mean it includes tax increases? And if so, how much to do that, to get that universal pre-K, to get the 2-year community college situation?
Well, as noted, we're the only candidate from either party who has fully funded our proposals, and we have proposed that with a set of specific spending cuts because we need to do that. We close a number of tax loopholes that greatly advantage the biggest companies at the expense of small business, and some tax increases for those making over $500,000 a year or more, not because there's something wrong with their success, but because by investing that in, everybody is going to see growth, including those at the highest end. I do think it has been an enormous problem in Virginia and around the country that we have seen a tax code that leaves small businesses to try to compete against bigger corporations, 2/3 of which pay no taxes in Virginia whatsoever because they can afford the lawyers and the compliance departments to play by a different set of rules than our farmers and small business owners have to do. When we make these investments, as Virginia has done in the past on a bipartisan basis, we see growth, and we specifically see growth in the middle class. We've been told by the right for 30 years that when we give huge tax cuts at the high end, a few crumbs will trickle down to the rest of us. The problem with this is data. What you actually see is it does not create growth. It creates consolidation at the top, and it shrinks the middle class. It's important for us to make the investments in education, in workforce development, and in a tax code that's actually fair for the little guys to get a shot. When we do that, we see working and middle class growth, and we see that disposable income drive growth that benefits everyone, including those at the high end. That's been the compact here in Virginia of success, and that's what we need to get back to.
Well, thank you. I think this is a difference between our approaches and plans, and I think anytime someone tells you, I want to do something in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the first question should be, how are you going to pay for it? My plan cost about $37 million for 2 years of free community college with a give back after that. His plan calls for close to $500 million. And I think we have to be realistic in Virginia. Virginia is a fiscally responsible state, and to raise taxes and some of his other programs go up to close to $1 billion. That's not realistic in Richmond. The other thing that I have proposed is universal pre-K. I've relied in the past 3 years of a federal grant of $70 million. I also have had discussions, and I have plans. This, by the way, is a nonpartisan issue. We're going to bring the public and private sectors together. Private sector has a tremendous buy-in to pre-K education. They know how important it is for economic development, workforce development, and so they're willing to be at the table. And we can do this both community college and pre-K without raising taxes in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Well, sorry, that was an invocation, right?
30 seconds, yes.
This is a difference, and I think this probably goes to the heart of understanding why Dr. Northam voted for George W. Bush twice in 2000 and 2004. Trickle-down economics that he supported in the past does not create growth. Investment in the middle class and the working class is what creates growth. That's what we saw under the Warner budgets. That's what we've seen in the past in Virginia, and we're all benefiting 15 years later from those investments. I think leadership is about saying you can't get something for free. You have to pay for the investments in education. We need to grow here in Virginia.
Right.
I need to respond to that.
Northam, I'm sorry, we're going to move on to the next question, which involves health care.
Bill, I can't take an attack like that and not
Sir, you were the
respond.
one that invoked his plan first, talking about the dollar sign. That's what gave him a chance to respond.
Yes, sir, thank you.
So, Dr. Northam, to health care, the House has passed a bill to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. If it passes the Senate, the President says he'll sign it. He says it will cause premiums and deductibles together to go down. But Senator Mark Warner says it will take away health care coverage from millions of Americans and will negatively impact more than 3 million Virginians with pre-existing conditions. How would you as governor go forward with the aforementioned divided legislature to make sure Virginians have coverage?
Thank you, Bill. And just to follow up on the last question, I don't think people are concerned who I voted for 17 years ago. And what's more, when I was asked the question, I told the truth. That's important for voters across the Commonwealth of Virginia. In 2009, Mr. Perriella made a statement that he was really a libertarian at heart, and the only reason that he switched to being a Democrat was so that he could run for Congress. He also, I've got it, I'll show it to you after the debate. He also bragged while he was on Fox News, of all things, that he was proud to have voted with the Republicans over 60% of the time. So people that live in glass houses shouldn't be throwing stones, because sometimes the glass, when it breaks, can get very sharp. Now, the Affordable Care Act. I will tell you, as a doctor, there are good things about the Affordable Care Act. No more pre-existing conditions, keeping our children on our policy until they're 26 years old, the emphasis that's placed on access to women's reproductive health care, the emphasis on mental health care, the emphasis on preventive care. There are good things. So rather than say, let's repeal and replace, let's have a plan on the table. Let's bring people together and say, what's in the best interest of the Commonwealth of Virginia and this country? So to just say repeal and replace is not the answer. We need to make sure that all Virginians have access to affordable and quality health care. That's why there's no better time than right now for a doctor to be at the table and make sure that that happens.
Dr. Northam, that's just a pretty sad attack. In the 9th grade, I was already working on Doug Wilder's election as the first African-American governor here in Virginia. I've spent 20 years of my life fighting for progressive causes. I've been running nonprofit organizations. I spent 3 years building organizations to push back against the George Bush agenda that you were supporting at the time. Their attacks on the poor, their attacks on seniors, their busting of the budget. I was devoting my life to that, 20 hours a day. So I think you're going to need to get a little better defense than that coming forward. But let's talk about health care. This is not a game, and on this, Dr. Northam and I could not be more in agreement. What we saw happen in Congress last week was a travesty. It took us back 10 years of handing the power back to the insurance companies to be able to deny people care effectively based on pre-existing conditions, to be able to greatly increase premiums and undermine the essential benefits package I was proud to vote for in the Affordable Care Act that guaranteed mental health parity, addiction services, and pre- and postnatal care that are saving middle-class and working-class families in Virginia desperately needed money. This is absolutely an attack on Virginia's healthcare system, which is why I've challenged Ed Gillespie today and before to say whether he will seek any waivers of the insurance company rules.
At this time, I'd also like to remind our audience about decorum. Please remain quiet until the end. I thank you. Now, Dr. North. Still on the subject of health.
Is it him or me?
It's North or Moore?
I thought it would be you. Is that me?
Oh, Perriello.
All right, good catch.
Still on the subject of health care, if we can stay on the subject of health care. Last week, Aetna announced that it will be pulling out of Virginia's individual market because they have been suffering big losses. I know you've heard about that. And United Health might not offer policies in the state next year. Isn't this proof that Obamacare is collapsing?
This is proof that the games the Republicans have been playing for the last 7 years are costing people their insurance and their lives. If they had spent this time working across the aisle to expand Medicaid here in Virginia, you would have seen premiums go down. Not just the 400,000 people who would have gotten coverage, but all of us who have private insurance have been paying higher premiums because they would not accept that Medicaid expansion, so those costs get passed on to the middle class. If they had allowed the certainty of knowing the Affordable Care Act would stay, you would have seen the private insurance companies able to invest more in competitive plans on the exchange. There are real consequences for the working class, the middle class, and the poor of the games the Republicans, both in Richmond and in Washington, have been playing for far too long. This latest game is the most dangerous yet. And for those who say it can't survive the Senate, those are the same people who said Donald Trump could never get elected. We have to remain vigilant in our resistance to this terrible step backwards, and we need to make sure that we elect a governor who will absolutely reject any attempt by the legislature to waive these rules we fought too hard to gain. I was proud to support the Affordable Care Act. I believe we should have had a stronger version with a public option in it and negotiated cheaper prescription drug rates. I believe it's time to be focusing on how to make this more affordable, not to keep parrying these attacks from the Republicans that try to undermine it for working class families that are struggling too hard.
As I said earlier, the Affordable Care Act, there are some good things about it. Could it be improved? Absolutely. But let me explain to Virginia tonight what's going on with Medicaid. And this new health care plan in Washington is very, very dangerous. It is at risk of pulling hundreds of thousands of people off of their coverage, especially those with pre-existing conditions. And if Washington does what we call a block grant, Virginia is very vulnerable. We're vulnerable because politically we chose not to expand Medicaid. That was our friends on the other side of the aisle. But we've also had to be very frugal. We are now 47th in the country on what we spend for Medicaid. So if this block grant moves forward, they're going to look at Virginia and say, well, Virginia, you've done well with this amount of money. This is what we're going to give you. We're at risk to lose millions of dollars compared to other states. Again, it's a reason, it's a time that we need people that understand health care, such as myself, at the table to make sure that all Virginians have access to affordable and quality health care.
Dr. Northam, moving now to immigration. Just yesterday, the U.S. Court of Appeals here in Richmond heard the case involving President Donald Trump's travel ban, the revised travel ban. That case certain to end up at the U.S. Supreme Court. And it's safe to assume you both oppose that ban, but you've both talked about your desire to court Donald Trump's voters. Many of them are likely to support that travel ban, believing it's necessary to protect ourselves against terrorism. What do you say to those people whom you would court?
Well, thank you for that question. And you know, the United States of America is a country built with immigrants. And I want to tell you about one of my staffers. He and his family moved to the United States of America about 15 years ago from Ghana. They have both worked, the parents. They have now put 3 of the 5 children through Virginia colleges and universities. My friend that is on my staff graduated from William & Mary. Now, the point that I would make to all of you tonight is that it is families like Seth that have in the past and will continue to make America great, not Donald Trump. So that's what we need to focus on. And as I said, this country is built off of immigrants. We just look around. We live in a very diverse society. So what he did with this travel ban, especially as a United States Army veteran, was an embarrassment. It was unacceptable for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Terry McAuliffe, Mark Herring, and I, and Tom, I know you've been working, traveling around the Commonwealth, trying to make sure that immigrants feel comfortable in this state, to make sure that we're welcoming them there. So at the end of the day, something that I can tell you we're very proud of, starting with the top, and we will continue to be as long as we continue to elect Democrats. Our Commonwealth of Virginia We'll be open, we will be welcoming, the lights will be on, the doors will be open. That's the way a business moves forward. And I want to tell everybody in Virginia right now, we're going to do everything we can to protect immigrants and to make sure that you're not being discriminated and that you're comfortable here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
The immigrant story is my family's story, and it's America's story, and the Constitution is Virginia's story. When James Madison wrote the Constitution, they were very specific about not wanting to allow a religious test. I believe Donald Trump's travel ban twice has violated that with the clear intent of their statements. I was very proud to be at the march yesterday here in Richmond and see people across generations and across faiths come out to put Virginia values in our Constitution ahead of these efforts to demagogue the weak and vulnerable among us. I was out at Dulles Airport the night the travel ban was announced, and I was so inspired by the lawyers that were there, most of them Virginian. And they actually traced their family roots to 25 different countries around the world. But we're all fiercely proud of being Virginian. They had their copy of the Constitution, and they said nobody, not even the most powerful person in the land, is going to stand in the way of making sure basic rights and dignities are protected here on Virginia soil. As someone who's worked in the national security field, including time in Afghanistan and conflict zones across Africa, I can tell you this move by Donald Trump makes us less safe. This is a gift to our enemies. We must stand for our values. That's how we stand strong.
Mr. Perio, still on the subject of immigration. The sanctuary city debate is raging in many parts of the country, with some local officials saying they will not help the government enforce federal immigration law. One Richmond voter wrote us saying that many undocumented immigrants work hard, pay taxes here in Virginia. Is there a way to help them without violating federal law?
I believe there is, and I believe the recent court decision came down that way, as I predicted several weeks ago. The anti-commandeering jurisprudence is very clear that Donald Trump cannot make the threats, even as president, that he has made to undermine our cities and states and their ability to move in these directions. We need to be thinking about how to make our communities safer by things like the offering of driver's licenses. We need to be moving away from things like the 287G partnerships that undermine public safety and public health, as well as the dignity of our neighbors. I've talked to too many people across Virginia, public school teachers, who've talked about students who haven't even shown up at school because parents are worried about their families being torn apart. I was at an interfaith meeting not long ago where they were sharing parenting advice about binders of information about children, their pediatric phone number, their allergies. And I thought this was just general tips, but it was about the fear that if a parent disappeared in the middle of the night in an ICE raid, someone else in the mosque or parish would pick up the binder and take care of their neighbor's children. This is not who we are in the Commonwealth. We must address this fear both with our law and with our compassion. I believe we can do that here in Virginia and speak to something that's good for our economy, it's good for our national security, and it is definitely good for our values.
There is nothing more detrimental than the breakup of a family. And you know, the Republicans this year put a bill that came through the Senate to ban sanctuary cities. It was nothing more than a message that they were trying to say, because we don't have sanctuary cities in Virginia. And I was proud to be able to break the tie to make sure that that didn't happen in Virginia. I'll tell you what really bothers me the most about this travel ban. We have scholars right here in the Commonwealth of Virginia that are fearful of leaving, that they won't be able to come back with their families. We have faculty members that are fearful. And what really is we all should pay attention to this. I fought during Desert Storm. We had people from Iraq help us with not only interpretation, but also the gathering of intelligence. The last thing that this country, the United States of America, should do is turn our backs on the very people that have helped protect our freedom. So one last thing I would tell, I have always been supportive of the Dreamers Act. Children that are living here should have the same rights that every other person in Virginia has, and we should do everything that we can possibly to keep families together.
Dr. Northam, hate crimes have been in the news a lot lately. Reported hate crimes on the rise. Early this year, Attorney General Mark Herring sought to expand the state's definition of what constitutes a hate crime to include not just race and religion, but also gender identity, sexual orientation, and disability. Sarah from Richmond would like to know what your plans are for reducing hate crimes of all kinds.
Well, thank you for that question. And I mentioned the racial profiling earlier. That is something that has no place in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And, you know, I think we have to ask ourselves, why are we seeing the increase in hate crimes. And what my answer is to that is because of who our president is right now. He ran a campaign in 2016 that was based on hatred, bigotry, discrimination, fear, and a lot of misinformation. And the last thing that people in the Commonwealth of Virginia need to do is worry about their families and their safety in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So what do we do about it? I'll tell you exactly what we do about it. These elections have tremendous consequences, and not only on June the 13th, but on November the 7th, we have an opportunity in the Commonwealth of Virginia not only to elect a governor, a lieutenant governor, and an attorney general who are Democrats that are like-minded people. We also have the opportunity to take back our House of Delegates. We have 34 delegates who are Democrats. We need 17 more. We can do that. There are Republican seats that were won by Hillary in 2016. So our job, all of our jobs in here tonight, is to harness the energy that we are seeing across the Commonwealth of Virginia, take it to the polls, and as I tell people, we try to change minds in Richmond, but you can't always do that. So if we can't change someone's minds, we need to change their seats. So that's what we need to do as Democrats in 2017.
I was very proud to support hate crimes legislation when I was in Congress, and we are at a very scary moment. I agree with Dr. Northam that it begins the responsibility absolutely at the top with President Trump, but it also belongs with those who have enabled President Trump and his demagoguing. We have not seen Ed Gillespie show one iota of moral courage to distance himself from any of the acts of hate or bigotry or divisiveness that have come from President Trump. He has not been willing to put Virginia's values first. He had an opportunity to come out and criticize the travel ban, attacks on trans teens, and other efforts like raids in our community. We saw an event at Trader Joe's in Northern Virginia just recently where a Muslim woman who was just trying to grocery shop was attacked by another shopper. And we've heard nothing but silence from Ed Gillespie and the Republican Party. What happened to the idea of love of neighbor? What happened to the idea of compassion? Those are Virginia values. Those are human values. We must show on June 13th in this primary that the response to hate and bigotry is an unprecedented volume of progressive turnout in this primary. I hope it's for me, but no matter what, the size of that turnout will be one of the strongest signals we can send today.
Gentlemen, thank you. That'll be it for the questions. We will now begin our closing statements. Mr. Perriello.
I'm so blessed to have been born and raised in Virginia. I had the opportunity to grow up in Charlottesville and Albemarle County. I had the opportunity to represent Southside Virginia in Congress, and now have lived the last 6 years in Northern Virginia. I've seen a lot of different parts of the state. I've had the chance to be a teacher and a diplomat, a peace negotiator, and someone who's tried to work to reduce poverty in our communities. And in every community I visit, I learn a great deal along the way. And we are divided right now, there's no question about it. But underneath that is still a common sense of humanity and a common sense of a dream of your children being able to live a better future than you've had. The ticket to that has always been education and workforce development. I believe we need to get ahead of the next generation of threats. Over the next 15 years, automation could disrupt 35 to 50% of all jobs in Virginia. We need to be getting ahead of that. And that includes some of the very coding jobs we're encouraging people to move into. Instead of the old model where people go to 4-year university once, we're going to see people coming in and out of workforce development and training 5 or 6 times over a career. We can't afford for that to start with a mountain of $35,000 in debt that one never gets out of. Instead, we need to figure out how to have a debt-free pathway into the working and middle class, how we can reduce those student loan payments, and how we can get back to building and making enough things here in Virginia that we can create the small businesses and jobs of the future. I believe leadership is about knowing the next generation of threats and not just the last generation of threats, and being willing to put real solutions on the table. I'm proud of being the first campaign in Virginia history to stand for a $15 an hour minimum wage, 8 weeks of paid medical leave, universal pre-K, and 2 years of debt-free higher education, because we believe that that is the new Virginia Compact that gives people the pathway into the middle class that my dad was able to have and work hard for 2 generations ago. I believe if we come together, ultimately we can unite red and blue, north and south, east and west, and renew that idea of a Virginia dream for a new generation that is not a cycle of debt, but is a cycle of savings and opportunity and dignity that leaves no race or region behind here in Virginia. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all being here tonight, and those that are viewing from afar, thank you for tuning in as well. You know, we learned in 2016 that these elections have tremendous consequences, and not only is it our responsibility this year to make sure that we win the statewide offices, but also pick up our majority in the House of Delegates. Virginia deserves a governor that knows how to win. They deserve a governor that will stand up to the hatred and bigotry that are going on in Washington right now. They deserve a governor that will continue to fight for progressive democratic values, a governor that will promote economic opportunity for all Virginians, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, a leader and a governor that will stand up and make sure that our children have the same opportunity that I had when I was growing up, and a leader that will make sure that our parents have the same opportunities that Pam and I have had to raise our children. You know, I, as a pediatrician, have held a lot of babies in my arms, and I have looked into their eyes. And when you look into a baby's eyes, you see joy and affection and love. You don't see the hatred and the bigotry that we often see in society. So we have to ask ourselves, and why these elections are so important, is what are those babies going to grow up? Are they going to be in inclusive communities? Are they going to have access to world-class education? Are they going to have access to affordable and accessible care, health care? And are they going to live in environments where the air is clean and the water is clean? So this is what this election in 2017 is about. I would be privileged to have your vote on June the 13th. We're in this together. We live in the best state, in the best country in this world. So let's get it done in 2017. Let's not only stand up to what we're seeing in Washington, but let's be ready to take Virginia to the next level. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, and God bless all of you.
And we would like to thank both candidates. Thank you, sirs, for a spirited civil debate. I'd like to thank the audience for joining us tonight. And remember, the primary is June 13th.
And anyone with questions should go to the website of the Virginia Department of Elections. There you can register to vote, find your polling place, and learn what kind of identification you'll need to bring with you.
And thank you for watching the 2017 debate for the state. Have a great night.
Thank you all.
Very good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for watching the 2017 Debate for the State.